retiree planning. Sorry, just a sec. Got it. At our last retiree planning group, Ian invited me to lead in a way at today's gathering that would somehow bring us together as a group. Actually, I think it was Ian's way of simply saying, will you offer a prayer? Well, since faithful praying is being utterly honest before God, I want to do that. I want to pray what we mean and mean what we pray. And since we are meeting in the name of God's beloved, we are therefore a manifestation of being church, being followers of the way, the Jesus way, however haltingly we may do that. And as I thought about being church, what came to my mind was a conversation which I had read about that took place between theologians Paul Tillich and John Oldham as they lunched one day in London, England. Oldham said to Tillich, Christianity has no meaning for me whatsoever apart from the church. But I sometimes feel as though the church as it actually exists is the source of all my doubts and difficulties. Well, on a lighter note, as one line of Doggerel reminds us, to live in love with saints above, that will indeed be glory. To live below with those I know, that's a different story. Even so, let us pray. O God of holy mystery and all-embracing love, you who are so patient and gracious in your dealings with us, we come today bringing with us all kinds of questions, concerns, and affirmations about that strange body of people we are so bold as to call church. So help us in these next few moments to truly hear what you want us to hear, to be what you want us to be, and to do what you want us to do. These and all our prayers we offer in the name of Jesus and his relentless love. Amen. May it be so.
Thank you, Wayne. Our guests today are Rosemary Lambie and Paul Reed. Rosemary is Executive Minister and Paul is Speaker of the Assembly of Elders for our region. Through contacts with retirees, we know that many of us have questions about the region's role and operation and how we relate with it. When Rosemary and Paul agreed to meet with us, we invited everyone to suggest questions, and thanks to those of you who have responded. Those submissions were used to create the list of questions which were sent to our guests early in the week and to all of us on Tuesday. And since our time is limited, it's going to be frustrating, I know, for all of us. There will probably not be opportunity for dialogue as we move along, but we are all encouraged to share questions and comments as we move through this using the Zoom chat function. Elizabeth McDonald will be taking notes, including our chat entries, so that they may be shared with Paul and Rosemary for any follow-up that they deem appropriate. And again, Ian mentioned it, please mute yourself and stay muted unless you really need to be heard. So let's get started. And for those who have not received the questions, and also for the sake of the video that others will share later, I'm going to read the questions in sequence as Rosemary and Paul respond as they have prearranged. That's okay with everybody? We'll get going. The first question that was received from you and sent to them, and more, this is a good place to start. We're asking them to provide an overview of the role and operations of the region, in particular as it compares with what we know, that is the Presbytery Conference System. And from their perspective, from your perspective, Paul and Rosemary, what is its greatest challenges and how might they be addressed in your opinions?
This is Rosemary. I would say that we cover a lot of the same work as the former presbyteries and conferences did, but the advantage is that committees have been consolidated to avoid cascading appointments. In the past, you used to have a stewardship committee at presbytery and then a conference stewardship committee. And so people had multiple times of doing the same work with smaller groups of people. So I would say part of the challenge now is that we're dealing with a much larger geography to engage people, and that rather than your small presbytery groupings, that we're trying to do the same work and engaging more people that we didn't know before, or you may have known in another context, and trying to gather them and find ways to do that and to prioritize what is the important ministry. And we have found that lots of people who were involved in the past said, okay, I'm tired now, it's not my turn anymore, somebody else can take it over. So there is a lack of volunteers, and I'm not saying that in any way to make anyone feel guilty, but the younger generations of the church are not as involved as our generation and your generation, and my parents and grandparents before us. So that is definitely a challenge, and it would have been there even if we hadn't changed structures.
I was going to say it's commonly a presumption is that the conference and the presbyteries have been replaced by the regional council. But in fact, they have been replaced by the regional council, the office vacation, and the informal networks of clusters and networks. Some of the pastoral relations stuff, well, not so much pastoral relations, but the education of students, the oversight and the discipline of ministers all belongs with the Office of Vocation, as well as a bit of a role in the pastoral relations. And the regional council really has picked up the business work, the mission work of the presbyteries and the conferences, much as Rosemary has identified, in perhaps a more concentrated effort rather than duplication. But what's often overlooked is the importance in the restructuring of the church and in the life of the regional council and the people of the regional council is the role of the clusters and the networks. I mean, you've already identified this network as being important ways to engage with one another. I would say, though, that one of the biggest challenges we face is getting people into clusters and networks so they can find the mutual support, the opportunities that would have been part of the informal life of gathering at presbytery. I mean, we came to do the work. No, we came for the dinner and the fellowship and did the work while we were there. And that's going to be hard to replicate. I know a number of the presbyteries set up clusters that they thought would continue. COVID has made that really difficult. But that's an area that I think we need to really concentrate on as a community, is how to get people engaged in the networks and the clusters and in the life of the community.
Thank you both. Moving on then, in the former organizational structure, there was both formal and informal lateral accountability. Courts had prescribed authorities and responsibilities, and their membership provided a kind of cross-pollination of accountability. The routine of presbytery meetings provided a forum in which those vested with decision-making and other authority could answer directly to their order of ministry and lay colleagues. So would you please describe your understanding of leader accountability in the current model, and has the lateral model been replaced by a more hierarchical one? And how does this model fit the conciliar paradigm, which is the tradition and a defining characteristic of our denomination?
I'm going to say that I found the presumption of this question to be really interesting, because as being part of the commission that designed the structure of our regional council, there was really strong emphasis on getting away from being a hierarchical model and being a much flatter model. You know, presbyteries had their committees. Those committees formed, you know, the chairs of those committees formed the executive. The members of those committees formed the conference committees. The chairs of those formed the conference executive. And there was, you know, one president to rule over them all. There was hierarchy in that structure. But the commission, when they set up this regional council, didn't want to have a hierarchy, did not want to have a president. And what's kind of unique in our structure is the work of the regional council is done by the teams. The covenant support team, the mission through property, the equity team, the faith, I won't get this one always wrong now, the formation, nurture and justice team, and I think I've missed one, nominations team. They are drawn from the church, not necessarily from the regional council representatives, but from the United Church of, anyone who lives and worships within this regional council can apply to be on one of those committees, and the nomination teams makes the recommendations to ensure that there's the real diversity, but also the skill set that's needed for that work. But what's really unique is the Assembly of Elders, because we do not come from any of those teams. And the Assembly of Elders are selected through a nominations process to create a body that is representative of the regional council. The demographics of age, orientation, status is clergy or lay, geographically, in whatever way they can to try to create a representative body. So that the teams doing the work on behalf of the regional council, when they give their reports to the Assembly of Elders, it's very much they're giving them back to the people who make up the regional council. And as Assembly of Elders, our job is to assess their work to make sure it reflects what the regional council wants. So it's not a hierarchy where the select are then selecting their own supervisors who guide the work, but the work comes back to the body. So I think it's much more lateral than a hierarchy. And I would just say that the speaker, think of the speaker in terms of the House of Commons, where the speaker is not the prime minister, not a member of the ruling body, but just a person that helps keep things moving in a reasonable fashion.
Did you want to add to that, Rosemary?
I think Paul has given you a wonderful answer.
Okay. I think so. My sense of it, having been the one who received the input, I think the wording of the question, however interesting it might be, it does reflect a perception that maybe we can't judge how widespread it is, but that may be something to consider going forward if, in fact, Paul, the reality is very different from that perception.
Well, Ed, I'll just respond to that. And I know it's more than just a perception. I think that there are many people who want to try to create the new structure in a familiar way. And it's really easy if you're at any distance from it, to put the titles back in or translate the new titles into an old format. So I'm not surprised when people sometimes think that I'm the president of the conference, president of the regional council. And I really do have a job, as do others, to try to help people get a sense of how different our regional council is from the old structure. Obviously, there's work to be done.
Thank you. We'll move on then. So many retirees and active or administrative personnel express a mourning for the loss of community that was available in presbyteries. Paul, you've alluded to this. A consequence of ordination commissioning was that our, quote, congregation was the presbytery. It was in the meetings and work of presbytery that we experienced fellowship, spiritual nurture, collegiality, and a sense of engagement in the life and work of the denomination beyond the local church and community. Does the new organizational structure include any means of addressing this loss of community? And does the mandate of any staff or leadership group include the disconnectedness and isolation described by so many? I think it is a chance to follow up on what you were saying about that clustering business earlier, Paul.
1, 2.
Ian, is it possible for you to allow me to share my screen?
Ian, this is where if you make her, I understand, if you make her a co-host.
1, 2.
I tried to create a diagram that might help you understand, but it's very rough because I've done it on the fly here, but
Well,
Well,
Rosemary's working on that. I was just going to say that I think that when people were planning the restructuring of the church, a lot of emphasis was given onto the business of the church, the work that needed to be done, the human resources stuff. It was certainly, about trying to reduce the demands on volunteers and trying to also bring in more skills where skills were required. And with all of that emphasis, there was not a lot of attention given to how the fellowship, the networking would really take place. The assumption was just that if people wanted it, it would happen. And I think what we've seen is the people who want it, the people who need it, are often those who are feeling overwhelmed, are struggling, are feeling disconnected, and don't have the means to achieve what they truly need to achieve. And there needs to be some external or some leadership put forward to help make that type of networking and clustering happen.
I can just cut in there. Okay, Paul, give me some ideas about co-hosting here for Rosemary.
If you're the host, you should be able to go down to your share screen option.
Yep.
And I think there'll be a pop-up box that will indicate that you can allow others to share their screen.
Advanced. Share screen. Advanced sharing option.
In there, I think it has the option of allowing one other or allowing many others to share screen.
Yeah, okay. Rosemary, you should be okay now.
okay, I will try this. All right. So as I say, this is a very rough. Oops. Let me make it a little bit smaller so you can see it better. That's what it looks like. All right, so it'll be hard to read the text, but basically, the sizes of the circles don't necessarily aren't percentages of the bodies, but it was some places just to fit the text in. But your question about the regional council is made up of volunteers, which is ordained ministers or the order of ministry, and the lay folks. We have a staff team that includes, you have 1/3 of me and 1/3 of my administrator, Joel. You have David Timpson, who is full-time doing pastoral relations. You have 4/5 of Sharon, who does clusters and networks and youth ministry. And you have 1/5 of Rodney, which is 1 day a week, doing Indigenous ministry. The staff, most of them, except Rodney, participate in the Assembly of Elders just as support for the volunteers, which are elected by the
Rosemary,
regional council. Yeah, sorry.
Can I remind you of Karen?
Oh, yes, sorry. Okay, I knew it was wrong. Yep. Yes, okay, we have Karen, who is 3/4 time communications. I will fix that. I'll have to probably make that circle bigger. Okay, so the staff are paid employees who work, are paid 35 hours a week and work who knows how many hours a week, but as a full-time employee. I can't change that without messing things up. The Assembly of Elders is, as Paul explained, a gathering of people who have been elected from this large circle of all of you. And they meet once a month and go through, get reports back or make decisions based on what all the others have been doing. So a lot of it comes from the leadership teams, which again are elected from the ordered and the lay by the regional council, and they get support from the staff, depending on which one it is, which leadership team it is. There is a staff support person identified to go with each of those. Some of the leadership teams have forums that do work for them, like such as the liaison forum that reports to the covenant support team. So it's a bit of a deploying into smaller work. The place where the majority of people fit in is under local clusters and networks, and Sharon is staff support for both of those. Local clusters could have been what you thought of as being your former presbytery gatherings, or UCW, which wasn't necessarily presbytery, but wider, or other things. The networks tend to organize themselves both locally and nationally based on passions. So there are a number of social justice networks, the Indigenous ministry networks, other things where they're very much focused on a piece of work which is not related to where you live. Whereas the local clusters, it's much more to be supportive of people in your neighborhood or the next neighborhood over. So how can we help each other? How can we be supportive? And in a perfect world where we could be together, you could physically gather, where the networks tend to gather online anyway, because they're spread it all over, but are sharing the support for each other in terms of a passion or an idea. So I don't know if that helps answer that question. I hope so. I'm a visual person, so for me, it's easier to have a diagram than just a bunch of words. But
thank you for that, Rosemary. So in all of that, assuming that the clustering, I think we observed that the clustering that some of us are longing for isn't happening spontaneously. In all of that, is there any leadership, either staff or any of the volunteer groups that have responsibility for encouraging the development of clustering?
that's part of Sharon's portfolio as staff support, but she doesn't create the networks. She helps facilitate them gathering, or helps support ideas, but she will not be doing all the legwork in terms of creating them.
Right.
In the covenant support, I mean, one example there, I mean, you're familiar with the forum, that is your retirees forum, which is taking the initiative to help create this network of retirees for support, and you're doing education as well. Likewise, the licensed lay worship leaders, the covenant support team has created a forum, and that forum has helped to build a network of the LLWL. So they are brought together on a regular basis. They've got now their own leadership. So there's places where it's happening. Mary Margaret has made, is spoken of how difficult COVID has made getting together. And I was going to say the same thing. I know that there was presbyteries, as they dissolved, committed to saying, okay, we're going to cluster together. We're going to keep something going. And you can't meet in person. And there are so many who are not comfortable with the technology, or do not find the technology gathering to be at all helpful. It just seems to add to their stress. So it has made it difficult. When we had our first in-person meeting as a regional council, we actually had set up time on the agenda to encourage people who were looking for the possibility of networking, if they had something in mind that they wanted to share, to name it. But it's, again, since we're all online and everything has been abbreviated, the achieving clusters and networks has been very sporadic. And until we're able to achieve that in a better way, I'm afraid there's going to be a lot of people feeling left out.
Thank you. And some of these questions, of course, follow each other. Considering what amounts to a centralization of decision making, and again, that's a perception that may have more to do with geography than structure, but I'll wait for your response. Describe any policies or procedures that are being used to ensure that decisions related to individual order of ministry personnel or congregations are sufficiently well informed to be both fair and just, and what appeal mechanisms have been established, and has there been adequate attempt to make those appeal mechanisms known and accessible?
So I would say that policies and procedures about ministry personnel are handled by the Office of Vocation. And the appeal process has not changed from the past, so it continues as outlined in the manual in terms of how they've changed who you appeal to, perhaps because regional council wasn't in the old manual. In the new manual it's in there, but the process of appealing has not changed.
I think that the restructuring and the life in the regional council, as Rosemary just said, many things haven't changed. But one of the things that's happened, and it's something that began probably 15 years ago, where we started to rely on more highly trained people rather than just, presbytery used to engage itself by just sort of picking 3 available people and saying, go see what's going on over there. About 15 years ago, we started to use people who had more training in mediation skills, in conflict resolution skills, people who were trained to actually engage with the congregation to better assess and determine what kind of interventions are needed. So that's certainly a practice, a procedure that we've built on. We are relying on better skill sets in order to create more consistent results across the church. But the decisions, are still being made by the peers. I would say there's a peer group that receives those reviews, those assessments, and makes the decisions. So I think that we are indeed working towards something that is perhaps even more fair and more just. And again, it is a perception that things are centralized, and because you don't necessarily, you knew everyone that was in your presbytery. You don't know everyone in your regional council. And you certainly don't know everyone that's involved in the processes of the Office of Vocation. We always needed to be able to trust one another. We still need to be able to trust one another. When we're dealing with the communities of faith, that is much more the work of the regional council. And we do rely an awful lot on the liaison officers who are dispersed geographically and do have some historic knowledge of the congregations that they are assigned to work with, because it's usually from their former presbyteries, although some go further distance. And in our last budget, we presented a $50,000 budget line that was saying we're going to be able to hire an additional staff person who can really concentrate on providing the support to communities of faith that are in transition or in conflict. So there's still work to be done, trying to make sure that the people engaged have historic local knowledge, that they are people that, where we can, we invite the communities of faith to say, are you willing to work with this person? Is there someone else you'd like to work with? It is about, taking a responsibility to make sure that there's a relationship where there is engagement.
Paul, as I read the submissions that were informed this phrasing of the question, I was thinking of how justice must not only be done but must be seen to be done, and I know that's a challenge, definitely a challenge for leadership, but I guess for all of us. For my sins, the work that I was most involved with throughout my whole ministry in presbytery was oversight, and it was often very difficult, but there was the immediacy of accountability, that oversight report went to the full court, that all of the colleagues and peers saw that, responded to it. I was taken over the coals several times for what was considered to be perhaps a poor judgment. And I think maybe that's the kind of, not that anybody should be taken over the coals, but that may be the kind of thing that is the background to the question. And I'm sure the fact that the challenges and the kind of crisis that so many congregations are experiencing right now, it just just raises the bar on all of this to a horrendous level for those of you who are responsible. Forgive me, I'm not, it's not my job to.
In the last 2 years, a lot of the engagement has been around finances. COVID has caused so many communities of faith to go into a struggle. And we've really been relying on our mission through property and finance team to help resource those congregations, as well as general council resources to address things. But that type of work is almost overwhelmed I would say the staff. And I think of the work of David Timpson. We have relied on him so heavily to try to address the COVID concerns that it has been really hard to keep up on some of the other things that are there. And transparency is one of the things that is lost.
Thank you. Moving on, and I'm watching the clock. The work of pastoral oversight, moving right on, in presbytery provided in its ideal discipline of support and accountability for pastoral charges. It was collegial, proactive, and transparent. So does that oversight function exist in the present structure? Or I guess we want to know how it exists. If needs or concerns are identified, how are they addressed? And how are those with such authority held accountable to those they are mandated to serve?
Yeah, I'm looking to anyone who has the answer to that question.
Well, I can say that in the new way that pastoral relations and so on is done, there is a living faith profile. So the ideal scenario was that each community of faith would update what used to be your JNAC, that your living faith profile would be updated every year and approved at your annual meeting to have that document be current. And that was part of, and that is supposed to be sent into the pastoral relations team every year after your annual meeting, along with your annual report, so that we have a running story of where you're at. That is not something that communities of faith were used to doing in the past. And so even getting people up to speed, we have some that have been very good about doing it, and others that because of everything that's else gone on, we haven't had a chance to chase down and say, where's your living faith profile? Do you need help doing this? So as congregations are in transition, that's what they're working on with the liaisons. But for those who have had current ministry ongoing, they probably or may not have been working on updating their story. And that's how part of the pastoral oversight was being done, because then if issues are flagged as the reports come in, we can read those and say, okay, we see there's an issue, or it can be flagged by the community of faith itself. So that's an area where we need to do some work. We acknowledge that it just has not been able to be a priority. It's on the priority list, but because of everything else that's gone on, it has not had the attention that I would like to have seen it, but it is not forgotten.
It will be the work of the covenant support team. The liaison officers have a significant role in working with the congregations that are in transition. But the covenant support team in time should be able to, on an annual basis, review the profiles that are on Church Hub. And be able to identify those who have not been able to get that work up there, and to be looking for patterns in that, for completeness in that. I think, one of the challenges has been and you've featured Church Hub in your previous one. I mean, for a lot of people, for a lot of communities of faith, getting onto Church Hub in the first place has been a real struggle, and deciding who it is in the community of faith that is going to be responsible for doing it, who's going to write it, who's going to approve it. It is very much a work in process.
Thank you. So moving on then, when and how will the region's policies related to retired order of ministry personnel be reviewed? Is there opportunity for retirees and for the retirees forum to participate in the shaping and approval of policies which directly affect them?
I'm not aware that we have any policies. I looked very briefly at the governance handbook today, so I'm not sure if you're specifically really targeting a policy, but but ordained ministry are treated under the same policies, whether they're active or whether they're retired. We don't have particular policies just for retirees. So if there's a policy that you would like to see, perhaps it hasn't been created yet, that I would say this would be a group that would be welcome to work on that and send that to the executive, but I'm not sure what prompted that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one policy that would be thought of as being one for retirees is the VAM, the Volunteer Associate Minister, because although that's not exclusively a retired position, it is one that is often used by the retirees as a way of staying engaged. So I would say that we do have one that applies to retirees, but it's not exclusively retirees. But for any of our policies that we set as a regional council, we put a date on them at which point we expect to review them. That's going to get into a cycle at some point. I mean, we had a whole lot of policies being originated at the same time. So they need to be staggered in that review. But yeah, I mean, your question is, how do the retirees engage in the process? And the covenant support team will be the team that has the responsibility for reviewing those policies, determining when there's a policy required, and the forum, the retirees forum, which is there to help guide the covenant support team in work that pertains to retirees, would be very much a part of that. And they would be quite legitimate to say, like, this is going to affect our retirees. We're going to take it to the network and get input, so that all of you, anyone who's retired, and anyone would have a chance to then be able to respond and give comment to that. The covenant support team, I say that they're responsible for the policy. Now, the reality often is that for the teams, they'll identify a policy that's required or a problem with a policy, but then turn to others who are more adept at policy writing to say, do something about this. So although I say it's the covenant support team's responsibility, it may not actually be their work. We encourage the teams to farm things out to forums, to others, where there's a level of expertise that would be beneficial to bring to the task. But question, do you have an opportunity to give input? By all means. And as Rosemary said, you could even identify where you feel some type of policy is needed. And if others are convinced, then the work begins.
Thank you. Moving on then, we appreciate that geography and diminishing resources place a heavy burden on staff. And I think the diagram that Rosemary shared with us makes that pretty darn clear with all of the fractions that are involved. So how are region staff supported and held accountable? We assume accountability includes regular performance reviews. If so, how are they conducted? How often? What's the methodology for follow-up? Is there opportunity for those with whom staff interact to participate in performance reviews? And when workload demands make it necessary, how are priorities set and by whom?
Okay. They're supported by me as their supervisor, but they are also supported by each other. So each of the staff are part of a connecting body who are doing work similar to themselves across the country, or at least my 3 regional councils work together. So the pastoral relations ministers meet every month right across the country. They have a regular meeting. The communications team have a regular meeting across the country. The youth workers have regular meetings so that they're talking to each other from different sharing. And there's a thing called Teams on the church network where they can put in questions and issues and challenges at any time 24/7 and get support from each other who are involved in the same work. So that happens. I know that even beyond that my staff across the 3 regional councils talk regularly to each other about things that are coming up, or support each other if things are going on that they need help with, or when one takes holiday, or Whit was off on sabbatical, he was covered off by Dan, and so on, so that they're there to support each other on a regular basis for how that works. In terms of performance reviews, the idea was that there is a performance, they have one-on-one conversations with me, I would say every couple of weeks at least. Some of them I talk to every week, depending on which staff it is and how much they work. But the idea is that they would have a 360 review at least every 3 years. And a 360 review includes a questionnaire that's normally shared with 10 to 12 people with whom they have been working intensively during that 3-year period. And so I gather all the answers, I put them together in a document that is shared with the staff person. And I usually have a second person, often someone who may have helped hiring that person in the first place, to sit down with me, and we talk to them and we go through the document. And at the same time, we review the position description and see if there are things that need to be changed, because we have, in this regional council, we're on our 3rd communications person. So with each one of those changes, we have reviewed the job description. But for the others who have started from the beginning, there has not been that opportunity. So as we do review the comments that are made back and the areas that need work, we also revisit the position description to see how accurate it is. And if there are places that need to be changed, that's the opportunity to do it.
For the general council staff, which is what our staff are, the process really hasn't changed in the restructuring. The 360 review has been there, and those that have worked with the staff will often be, selected to be someone to give feedback. It's there. The opportunity is not necessarily there for just random people throughout the regional council to participate in the reviews. It's usually people who have an assigned an accountability relationship. But the accountability, I would also say that each month when the staff give their reports to the Assembly of Elders, it gives opportunity for the Assembly of Elders to reflect on whether they are doing the job that we expect of them as a regional council. And it was that type of conversation that gave rise to we need more time for dealing with congregations, communities of faith that are in transition and conflict. By reviewing the work that was being requested of a person and what was able to be done. So we're always holding, I guess, in its sense of performance and accountability in the work of the Assembly of Elders on behalf of the regional council.
Leaving it for you both, if to the extent that you're able to follow the chat, I'm not, the chat submissions, and if there's anything you can respond to, please do.
So I see that Wayne has just put in a question about feedback sheets, like an evaluation after a workshop or event. I know that we certainly do for the regional council meetings, that our communications staff sets up an online evaluation form immediately following the meeting. So I would say that it's up to each workshop leader as they're doing that. But I do believe that, and Aruna might be able to speak to that. She's been one of the people that has had ongoing workshops even through pandemic. And I think Karen has helped set up that. So I do believe that there are feedback sheets available.
For all the regional meetings, the equity team, well, for any meeting that of the regional council is coordinating, the equity team is present and is also compiling feedback, performance review of all of us, whether we're volunteers or not. Tomorrow morning, Rosemary and I will be participating in it with a group that'll start planning the spring meeting. And the first item on our agenda is to review all of the comments on the evaluation forms from the last meeting. So we will start with those comments as we begin to build for the next round of meetings.
Thank you. I guess, and it's probably very inappropriate for me to even try to interpret the input that I received. but I think what so much of what we're bringing to you comes from the perhaps our lack of understanding of the current system, which is great. That's what we're here for. But also our comparator is what we knew before. And with regarding staff, there was the conference staff committee, and I remember a couple of difficult situations when I was president of conference, which was an awful long time ago. I think everybody's died since then. Where members of the staff committee were approached by individuals with concerns, and it was I hopefully appropriately handled with a lot of confidentiality and respect and so on. And I really appreciate the value of the 360 reviews once every 3 years. But beyond that, and I know, Rosemary, you have to work awfully hard to make them effective. Beyond that, I think to what extent does it seem that it is more of a closed system as far as the staff's relationship with the constituency? I'm struggling just kind of to know where some of the energy that was certainly between the lines of some of the things that came to me. And maybe as a specific question, if leaders of a congregation or an order ministry person in active service, if they felt that there was something they really needed to surface in the work or relationship with a staff person, as you've described the system, Rosemary, you are the supervisor. Is that something that anyone would be entitled to bring to you in confidence? You're nodding.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
I think it seems to be a perceived gap in the HR reality of the new system, which we know, and Paul will remind us, is very much a work in progress.
Ed, can I bring in something at this point in time? I know we're down to our last 10 minutes or so. The first thing is I think our meeting this afternoon has been very helpful. I'd like to see it in print in the sense that there's a need for further clarification across the board about what we've been discussing. And the role of various committees, et cetera, within the ECOR. The second thing I would like to raise is the difference between forums and networks.
Can I interrupt you just for a second, because there's one more question that we haven't gotten to.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ed. Okay.
No, that's fine. That's fine. We'll. I just want to give Rosemary and Paul an opportunity to respond to the full slate.
Well, and just to respond to your last question, Ed, is even in the former structure with conference staff, yes, some conferences had staff committees and some didn't. But as the executive secretary for Montreal and Ottawa Conference, if there was an issue with one of my staff, it usually came directly to me, and then I worked on it with the staff committee or with the individual staff person. So in my mind, that hasn't changed.
Thank you.
So I understand. I'm hearing you say the perception is that there's nobody out there, but for me, because I came into this role in 2005, so I've been doing the executive secretary piece since 2005. Yeah,
I think geography has had an awful lot to do with some of the things that we're talking about. Yeah. So the last question, very quickly: has the Assembly of Elders undertaken any outreach to or conversation with the two regions with whom the ECOR shares staff, Eastern Ontario Outaouais and Nakanaka regional councils, about ways, and this I think is trying to be helpful here, about ways that the three regions might cooperate and collaborate to make more effective use of the staff and resources available? And does the Assembly of Elders have advice or guidance for forums such as, and networks such as the Retirees Group, who may choose to reach out to parallel constituencies in or groups?
I'm going to let Rosemary answer how it takes place, but I'm just going to say it's not the Assembly of Elders that's doing it. We are very much relying on the staff that have those relationships with the other staff to do it. So Rosemary can give some of the examples of what's happening.
Right. So as I mentioned before, the staff do have their regular things. We have done, before COVID, we did a joint liaison training for my three regional councils, and we had all the liaisons come together. We got a retreat center and put them all together. I think, Paul, you were even part of that.
Yes.
Back at the very beginning. So, and the staff worked on that. The youth, I'm not sure if the youth from this regional council are involved, but I know that there is a drop-in, I believe at 3 o'clock every afternoon for youth, that the other two regional councils have people dropping into as they want. That gives them a safe place to talk. So there is a lot of that kind of cooperation going, and they've had to pivot how they're doing it because of COVID, but there was certainly a plan. There was a plan to have a staff retreat with the three regional council staff together every year. Unfortunately, we only got the first one done before, and the plans were in the works for the second one. But yes, there is definitely cooperation and work and looking for ways to be supportive of each other as different things arise. So you are the model for retirees. I keep lifting this up to my other two regional councils saying, you need to get it going. But this is a perfect example of it wasn't done by staff. It was done by you folks yourself. And I'm trying to get the you folks themselves in my other two regional councils to see that this is important, so that I'm not using my pastoral relations minister to try to stir that. But in the other two, they're both trying to get something going with retirees. They don't have the number of retirees that you have for starters, but it's on the plate. It just is slower to get going because the energy has to come from the grassroots.
Thank you. Thank you.
A number of our policies were first written by one of the other regional councils. And, when we've had to deal with something, well, primarily Rosemary is able to bring to us the work that someone else has already done. That type of sharing takes place. And if we can be an inspiration to them, Rosemary will be an inspiration to them.
Yeah, well, in this one, you certainly are.
Thank you. So back to our chair, Ian.
Yeah, I thanks, Ed. I thank you all for being here. What are we, about 20 people, 24 people out of 160 who have email addresses, which seems to be fairly consistent around what we're doing. I must admit a slight disappointment in the fact that we haven't got the 140 or 50 people involved as well. Because if you've been 30 or 40 years in ministry, I'm sure rather than just abandon it completely, you want to meet colleagues and friends and to be able to discuss, as we're doing today, what we are doing currently and what we've done in the past. I guess the retirees, and I'm going to use the word forum or network, the retirees network is the ability to discuss in an informal way what we're all about, what we've been doing, etc., etc. But I started by saying I think we need slightly more clarification from Paul and Rosemary about the difference between retirees forums and networks. I've got two documents in front of me. A forum to support the East Central Ontario Regional Council, Covenant Support Team, and the ECOR Pastoral Relations Minister in the care and support of all those in receipt of United Church pensions in the East Central Ontario Regional Council of United Church of Canada. And then as far as networks is concerned, it says the Retirees Network is an informal gathering of retirees for mutual support, encouragement, and celebration. seems to me it's very much the same thing. It's two units that could be doing the same thing. So there's some confusion in my mind. Would you like to clarify that in some way, Paul or Rosemary?
I can try. The forums, the teams have a mandate, and they're not large teams. They're usually around a dozen people. And some of the mandates require specific knowledge. And so those teams have the option around that piece of work to gather 4 to 6 people to help them with that piece of work. And that's what the forum is. The forum doesn't necessarily have any responsibility beyond their body as a consultation. However, when the mandate says that to take care of a group, then the forum, in living out that part of the mandate, does give leadership to the creation of a network to where everyone is involved. The network has no specific agenda other than what the participants want it to have. A forum has an agenda that is set by the team that they are supporting and by the mandate that's been given to that team.
Thank you. So we are a work in progress. It's great to hear from Rosemary that we're providing a kind of modeling as we try and figure out our way. So we've described ourselves as a leadership team because that's what we're trying to do in this work. The 7 of us, I guess, and then and we referred to these gatherings as we may be creating a network of individuals across the region, but when we come together for this, and we've been trying to do it monthly, the language of forum fits what we're trying to do here, which is to come together for a specific purpose. But we'll continue to grow, and maybe we'll say, Ian, that we're providing leadership for our colleagues across the church. What we get done is much more important than who we are or what we're called, I guess.
Exactly.
So I want to thank our guests, especially Paul and Rosemary. When I was drafting the questions, I knew that I was setting a challenge for you, and now all the folk who have been with us and will watch the video, they get to decide the extent to which you managed to match the challenge. And I do thank you for the time that you've given us and the effort you've given to answering as clearly as possible. And thanks, of course, to all the rest of you who have joined us, as Ian had said. And for access to the recording or the notes of this meeting, you can contact Carolyn or Ian or Karen Wilson in the region office. And if you thought there was some value in this, or if you know of somebody, a friend or colleague who has been kind of asking the same kind of questions, then I'll leave it up to all of us to let them know about this and encourage them to access the video. They may find it an hour well spent. Please give us suggestions for future meetings. The first 3 have been very denominational information sharing, but we could focus on matters of theology, spirituality, social justice, ethics, whatever you tell us would interest you. Future meetings may also allow opportunity for more conversation than has been possible when the purpose of our hour is just to receive input, as these have been, and be great. We haven't set a theme for our next meeting, which is Thursday, February the 10th. So please get on to any of us, and we'll try and put something together for you. Again, thanks to Rosemary and Paul, and to all of you. Let's end by asking God's blessing for our colleagues, especially our colleagues for whom golden years may seem like bitter irony. God's blessing for those in active ministry who are helping congregations navigate the extraordinary challenges of this moment in time, and for all the neighbors in our many communities who are struggling, suffering, anxious, or grieving. And for this, although you're muted, let all the people say, Amen.
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 Thank you.